Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1, coming to you from a secret location just outside of Silverstone, a bit off the road, near a Brackley, really. I'm down here because I'm going to Silverstone tomorrow for a video that'll be on the channel in a few weeks, but right now it is time to do some driver ratings for the Baku Grand Prix, which overall I think was a bit of a dud, if I'm honest with you. I made a video on pretty much every session, apart from the practice sessions, of course. But yeah, sprint shootout I thought was fantastic. Qualifying was good. The sprint race was okay, and I think the main race itself was a bit dull. But enough about that. It is time to give the drivers an arbitrary number between 1 and 10. And the way I've done this is I've given them a number rating for the sprint race, then I've given them a separate number for the main race, then given that a weighted average between the two with more weight going towards their race number than their sprint race number. And once again, without the tripod, my arm is getting tired already. So let's go. Max Verstappen will start with. In the sprint, he qualified third, finished the race in third, swapping arms already. And then in the main race, he qualified second and finished second. And for both these races, I've given him an 8 out of 10. Because even though he didn't really make much, he didn't advance any places, in both races, he could have won, and there were reasons why he didn't. In the sprint, he had the damage to the side pod, and in the race, the safety car was very unlucky towards him, where he lost first place, even though he wasn't necessarily on the same pace as Checo. Swapping arms again. Yeah, he wasn't on the same pace as Checo for the race, but good. So overall, an 8 out of 10 for Max for Baku. Moving on to Checo Perez, qualified second for the sprint, finished the race in first, then qualified third for the main race and finished the race in first. And for both races, I've given him a 9. Some fantastic races for Sergio Perez here. The only reason I haven't given him a 10 wasn't perfect. Qualifying third for the race, even though he beat his teammate in the sprint, wasn't perfect, but overall fantastic racing from Checo. I've given him a 9 out of 10 overall. Now on to Charles Leclerc, on pole for the sprint, finished in second, and then on pole for the race, finished in third. And we continue the pattern now of giving the same score for the sprint and the race, because I've given him a 9 in both. Even though he lost positions, this is the strongest he's looked all year. It's the strongest Ferrari has looked all year. It's the first time anyone's put a dent into Red Bull in qualifying. And, there was not much he could do to compete with the straight line speed of the Red Bull in the races. He did the best that he could do. I haven't given him a 10 because I feel like, there is still room for improvement. But overall, there's nothing to be ashamed of from Charles' race at all. 9 out of 10 for him. And you'll never guess what. It continues. Because for Carlos Sainz, I've given him the same number for both races too. I promise you, there are ones coming up where I've had to do some maths, but we'll get there. Carlos Sainz, sprint race, qualified 5th, finished 5th. Then in the main race, qualified 4th, finished 5th. And for both races, I've given him a 7. Because, it's good, but it's not great. These are some of his best finishing positions of the year, but, they're not setting the world on fire, and he was considerably behind his teammate in every session. But, Charles is especially good around Baku, so I would expect Carlos not to be necessarily there. But overall, a 7. We move on to Lewis now, and in the sprint, he qualified 6th and finished 7th. Then in the race, he qualified 5th and finished 6th. So going backwards in both races, for the sprint race, I gave him a 5 because I just felt that was just bang average. Really, that's where he should have been. And also, he got done on the restart, losing 2 positions in one corner. So I feel a 5, just as a bang average score, is suitable there. And in the race, I have given him a 6 because I thought he did very well with Alonso, kept Alonso behind for the start, wasn't it? Yes, it was. It was a few laps. And then he did seem to making some gains towards the end on Carlos Sainz, but wasn't able to get it done. And the Ferrari was much quicker than the Mercedes this weekend, but Lewis made it seem like he was on the back of Sainz. So overall, though, it's a 6 out of 10. Now, for George Russell, in the sprint, qualified 4th, finished 4th, and then in the race, qualified 11th and finished 8th. For the sprint, I've given him a 7 out of 10 because I thought the result was very good for him, although, there was the incident with Max, and, we've gone over that before. Racing incident, really. I mean, I'd put the blame more on George than I would on Max, but, it's lap 1, turn 2 incident. It happens. And then for the race, he should be qualifying firstly a lot higher than 11th in that car, and then to finish 8th really wasn't great, so I gave him a 5 out of 10 for the race. So overall, it was a 6 out of 10 on average for George Russell. Now, moving on to Esteban Ocon, in the sprint race, he started from the pit lane and finished 18th. Then in the main race, he started from the pit lane and finished 15th. So in the sprint race, I believe he was one of the guys who was on the softs. Was he? No, he wasn't. Yeah, his race was really weird. He started on the mediums, then pitted for the softs, then pitted again for the softs, and was just nowhere. So for the sprint race, I've given him a 4 out of 10 because, he was nowhere, but it wasn't necessarily his fault. Then in the main race, he was one of those guys with Hülkenberg, starting from the pit lane, just went on the hards for as long as they possibly could. Really just was hoping that something would happen to put them in contention, whether that be a safety car or a red flag. Nearly murdered some press, not his fault, and then finished in 15th. So I gave him a 6 out of 10 for the main race because really both races there was nothing he could do, but he did finish better in the race. Overall, that's a 5 out of 10 for Esteban Ocon. Then Pierre Gasly qualified 17th in the sprint, finished in 13th, then qualified 17th in the main race and finished 14th. And for both races, I've just given him a 5 because, it's been an awful, awful, awful weekend for Alpine. There was the fire in the practice session and the worry about Esteban's car, and from there they couldn't get set up right. They were just on the back foot all the time. They never felt like they were happy. And you can see it in the results. The results don't show what that car is truly capable of, but I don't think anyone is necessarily to blame for that. So I've just given him the bang average score across both races of a 5 out of 10. So overall, a 5. Lando Norris now, and talk about tough weekends. McLaren brought these big upgrades, and you could tell that the car was in a better position. Lando Norris, though, qualified the sprint in 10th, would finish in 17th. Then in the race, he would qualify 7th and finish 9th. Now, in the sprint, he was one of the guys who started on the softs, which was a stupid idea, and just went backwards as the softs melted away. I've given him a 3 out of 10 in the for the sprint, because as much as also this wasn't his fault, it's just such a stupid mistake to make. I think everyone could see that it wasn't a good idea. And then in the race, he was just stuck behind Hülkenberg for the majority of it. He just lap after lap after lap of seeing him nearly look at the outside of Hülkenberg, but then not. So he just really wasn't anywhere in the race. I mean, he scored some points, which is good, and you could tell the car is much better. I gave him a 6 out of 10 for the main race, but a 3 for the sprint. So overall, it's a 5 for Lando. Oscar Piastri, though, in the sprint, qualified 11th, finished the race in 10th, and then in the main race, qualified 10th and finished 11th. So you swap them over. Fantastic stuff. Sprint race, give him a 6 because he gained some positions. Actually, well, he would have scored points, but they don't give points for 10th in the sprint. And then in the race, he went backwards by 1 position. He was just stuck in that DRS train behind Lando and Hülkenberg, so I gave him a 5. Overall, a 5 for Piastri. Bottas now, in the sprint, qualified 15th and finished 16th, and then in the race, qualified 13th and finished 18th. For the sprint, I gave him a 5, because he just lost 1 position. It was just nothing. Meh. And then in the race, I gave him a 3, because I really just don't know what was going on there. He just went backwards, he just pitted 3 times, when most other people were only pitting like twice at most. Most people just doing it on a one stop. It was, yeah, it was bad. Did he go on the softs as well on the sprint? Was he the other guy on the softs? Let me have a look. It was him on the softs. I should give him a lower score for going on the softs, even though he kind of didn't lose as much as Lando because he qualified lower. But I am gonna, yeah, I'm moving his sprint race down to a 3 as well because, you know, Alpha and McLaren share the stupidity of using the softs. So it's a 3 overall for Bottas. Not a good weekend for him. A weekend to forget. Zhou Guan Yu, though, qualified 14th in the sprint and finished 12th, and then he qualified 15th in the race and did not finish. For the sprint, I gave him a 6 because he managed to gain some positions, and to be honest, 12th is a lot higher than I think that Alpha should be. In the race itself, though, I gave him a 3 because he did qualify. He did DNF relatively early. He wasn't really anywhere in the lower half of the grid. I think he had some kind of technical issue. There wasn't much I could tell from what he did. So overall, it's a 4 for Zhou. On to the Astons now, and Fernando Alonso qualified 8th, finished 6th, and then qualified 6th, finished 4th. Sorry, he was able to gain positions in both races. I'm choking. Oh dear. Yeah, able to gain positions in both races, but gained a lot more in the actual race than in the sprint. For the sprint, I gave him a 7, but for the actual race, I gave him an 8. There's some fantastic moves from him, especially that one on Sainz. That was absolutely fantastic. So overall, it is an 8 for Alonso. His teammates, Lance Stroll, qualified 9th, finished 8th in the sprint, qualified 9th, finished 7th in the actual race, and I gave him a 6 for both because, you know, as much as he's qualifying a bit lower than he should. I know they had the DRS issues that really hampered him there, but, you know, he made up positions, made some good points, was looking pretty good. 6 out of 10. On to the Hasses. Kevin Magnussen qualified 13th, finished the race in 11th. Then onto the main race, qualified 16th and finished 13th. So gaining positions in both races, just outside the top 10 for the sprint. Similar to Lance, really, I gave him a 6 in both races because, you know, he's doing well, gaining positions when others aren't. And I think, especially in the sprint, 11th is a lot higher than that Haas should have been. So 6 out of 10 for him. On to Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 12th for the sprint, finished 15th, then started from the pit lane and finished 17th in the race. In the sprint, yeah, his car was just eating up the tyres there. It really just wasn't good, went backwards a lot. I'm going to give him a 4 for the sprint, but in the actual race itself, very similar to Ocon, he was just left out on the hards for just a very, very long time. He just wasn't really getting anywhere. Then we just had to pit later on because nothing really happened. So I gave him a 6. I gave him the same score that I gave to Ocon. So it's a 6 overall for Hülkenberg. On to the AlphaTauris. Yuki Tsunoda qualified 16th for the sprint and did not finish. Then qualified 8th and finished 10th in the race. I gave him a 2 out of 10 for the sprint because I thought it was just such a silly mistake to make. I don't think anyone hit. He just hit the wall in a place where you don't normally hit the wall, and then lost the tyre, and then the whole charade of going out and going back in again. And I know that's not his decision, but then it was his decision to drive around the entire track rather than just pulling over. And yeah, it wasn't great. Then in the race itself, he lost positions, but he got points, so I gave him a 6 out of 10. So overall, that would be a 4 for Yuki. Nick de Vries now. Wow, what a bad weekend for Nick. In the sprint, he qualified 18th and finished 14th, but in the race, he qualified 18th and did not finish. Now, the sprint, I think, was the only session that Nick did well in, so I gave him a 5. The race itself, a 2. You know, early on, hitting the wall again, caused the safety car. Yes, I really, at this point, I do not see Nick de Vries in that car or any of the Formula 1 cars next year. There needs to be some serious improvement here because, yeah, this was a really, really bad weekend for Nick de Vries, and I imagine he has cost AlphaTauri a lot of money. So overall, it's a 3 out of 10 for Nick. And finally, the Williams. Alexander Albon qualified 7th and then finished 9th in the sprint, then qualified 12th and finished 12th in the main race. I've given him a 7 for both races because even though he lost positions in the sprint, he qualified 7th in a Williams. I mean, come on, that's fantastic. And then, he was a bit higher than I expected him to be in the race. He's making that Williams look really good, and I think, one of these days his time will come where, the stars align and he has a fantastic race and gets some proper good points for that Williams. So overall, it's a 7 for him. And his teammates, Logan Sargent, didn't start the sprint, and then in the race qualified 14th and finished 16th. Let's start with the main race, because I give him a 5 out of 10, because I think that's about average of where the Williams should be. I think he qualified bit higher than he should, really. His first appearance in Q2, so you'll be very happy with that. But then losing some places, I think 5 out of 10 is suitable there. But for the sprint, he didn't start. And I've always wondered when I was doing these scores of what I would do if someone didn't compete in the race. And if it wasn't his fault, I would give him a 5. But because it was his fault, I feel like I have to give him a 0. Because he didn't even compete and he was solely to blame, which feels harsh, but I feel is the right thing to do. So it's a 0 for Sargent for the sprint. So on the weighted average, it's a 3 out of 10 overall for Logan Sargent. So there you go. That is our driver ratings for Baku 2021. And that is our final video. Not 2021, it's 2023. Oh my god. Jeez. What a day. That's our final video on Baku 2023. I hope you have enjoyed all the content we've put out this week. We'll be back again next weekend for Miami, and then keep your eyes out because there'll be a video on Silverstone coming soon, which should hopefully be a lot of fun. Until then, though, have a lovely week. Enjoy the bank holiday if you're in the UK, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.